Earlier this week, the United States Senate failed to pass a major bill that included legislation for combating the anti-Israel BDS movement. But the bigger news about the Senate vote is really on how the new Democratic Party seems more and more divided by the day when it comes to the Jewish state. Well, joining us now with more is former chairman of the United States Democratic Party in Israel, Sheldon Schorer. Sheldon, thank you very much for coming back and joining us on ILTV again. All right, so first of all, what are your initial reactions to the failure to pass the legislation earlier this week and the alleged divide within the Democratic Party?
All right, first of all, let's understand that there was legislation. In other words, there was a proposal to do two things. First of all, to reinforce Obama's promise to make 10 years of $36 billion available to Israel. So that's a pro-Israeli thing. And also was a provision in there to fight against BDS. Sure. Right? So, and the Democratic Party supported this bill. All right, it did not pass. All right, so one of the reasons...
if the Democratic Party supported this bill...
It supported the first part of the bill, but the second part has some problems. There are some questions about what... all right, so Bernie Sanders said, for example, why bring this up right now? Why should this be the very first bill of the new Congress? Shouldn't we do something about the government first? Or there was another question about whether being a anti-BDS bill inflicts on the Bill of Rights. There is a freedom of speech, and here you're impeding on the freedom of speech. So that portion was controversial. But the bill was brought up. That was the first thing that was interesting. So I think it's important.
Okay. So to answer the first hypothetical there that Senator Sanders brought up, why not now? What does it matter that it was the first bill or the 50th bill that was introduced on the Senate floor?
Well, they should address something about the government closure. That seems to be the biggest problem.
Sure, but why would that preclude? Why
No, it's a side point. But the point is that this is a pro-Israel proposal. Okay, the Democratic Party, I should remember, the platform of 2 years ago, of 2016, said specifically that the Democratic Party opposes any effort to delegitimize Israel, including at the United Nations or through the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
Sure. But now we have, again, what many would characterize as a new face within the Democratic Party. You have new senators who have been elected, like Rashida Tlaib, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who have made many statements that are questionable at best with respect to the Democratic policy.
They're congressmen, and they're for upstarts, and they're fresh new voices there. And yes, many of them are against Israel or are in favor of the Palestinians. That's a legitimate political position.
Okay, but again, so now let's look back, then at Bernie Sanders' second issue that you raised, which is with respect to issues of infringing on the First Amendment freedom of speech. In what way did it infringe on First Amendment freedom of speech? Because this was about economic sanctions, or preventing economic sanctions, really, against the Jewish state. It really had nothing to do with people's individual freedom of speech.
Well, no, it's if to pass legislation preventing people to propose to say, let us boycott. What if you get up and you say, I want to boycott Israel? That's freedom of speech. That's a political position.
Well, but he's referring to the right of people to engage in political activity. And in what way did this bill prevent that?
Well, no, what it said was that states are allowed to do this sort of legislation. It's a bit controversial. But what bothers me more, there is a division, as they started to say at the beginning, in the Democratic Party. We saw this during the 2016 election, the resurgence of Bernie Sanders and his group, the far left, against Hillary Clinton. Now, the party today still is more of the old guard. It is still led by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Okay, it is still very pro-Israel, and it's only, we're talking about a few people who are now 4 new members of the House of Representatives who are coming this. But it does display a trend. It does display that there is a far left in America who is represented by the Democratic Party, by some new voices, and we don't know whether this will be the voice of the future or whether or not this is just an out thing. There's the fact that some Arabs were elected. This is also nothing new. There have been many Arab representatives before.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with it.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I think that, again, though, I think the question that you just raised is, you're talking about the old guard versus the new guard, and the face of, anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, what have you. But if you combine these, I guess the next question is the Democratic Party doing anything to change that? Because when the old guard is removed or leaves office, retires, etc.
As I said, I don't know whether the next phase, the next elections, will see more of these 4 people who came in, or whether or not this is just an aberration that happened because of specific things that went on in their particular districts at the time. I think that still the Democratic Party is very much pro-Israel.
So how, do you have any maybe some advice for the Democratic Party if they're listening today, of how to maybe address this issue? Because regardless of whether or not there is an issue, it's perceived that there is an issue.
Yeah, well,
and perception it goes a lot further than facts these days.
It actually goes beyond the Democratic Party as well. It goes into the American Jewish community as well. And the Democratic Party, when they are, when they're speaking for Americans and American Jews, and they get a clue from them. And there is a growing division between American Jews and Israeli Jews on the issue of Israel, where many American Jews today are becoming becoming disenchanted with Israel, becoming more American, more leftist, and you see a division between the snap support for Israel that you saw 50 years ago doesn't exist today among the American Jewish community, and that is reflected also in the Congress as well. So, how is that going to play out? And will there be a reconciliation? Will there be more openness? It's hard to tell. It's a very disturbing and very unsettling thing for me as an American Israeli, and also a supporter of the Democratic Party, to see these divisions happening. And I hope that the issues will be addressed head on and dealt with.
All right. Well, I support you with that sentiment, that these issues should absolutely be dealt with head on. Sheldon, thank you so much for coming in.
Okay, pleasure.